us next up to give us some of his insight about the craziness that has occurred over the past 24 hours. It's none other than caster and analyst extraordinaire David Godz Parker joining us from Beyond the Summit. David, how are you doing this evening? What is happening
I'm good. How are you guys?
In your home?
This just in, peeps.
I'm like, what? I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
We are reeling. I didn't go to bed till 3 a.m. last night because of all of the roster drama. So I'm hanging in there, you could say.
Godz, are you wearing the Alliance tank top again?
Oh my God!
I'm an unbiased caster. I'm just wearing a great tank top.
Okay, sorry. I saw it. I was like,
I just woke up like 15 minutes ago. I'm in Australia, so this is like 10 in the morning, which for gamers is like 4 in the morning.
Yeah.
So I'm not normally awake at this time.
One of our reporters actually would regularly Skype into the video, join the Google Hangout for our morning meeting at like 11 in the morning, and she was always in pajamas because it was like 4 in the morning over in Australia. So
wow.
I understand your plight and appreciate you joining us. Now, Godz, obviously, you've been around the scene for quite some time, and you've been around the top level pro scene quite a bit. First of all, we've broken it down a little bit with Malastrix, but first of all, let me hear your thoughts on everything that went down over the past 24 hours. I mean, what was your gut reaction when you saw the posts start populating our Dota 2?
Wow, I guess I was very much. And my initial kind of surprise was then followed by like, okay, let's think about this. What's going on here? I think from the perspective of the teams, it's like, why not make any change that you can, given that this is a lock for the next 6 months. You're going to be playing not just the next major, you're playing at TI, where if last season anything to go by, could be anywhere up to like a $20 million prize pool. So even though a team like Secret wins the major, I don't think it's completely an outlandish idea that they go ahead and change their roster if they believe they can strengthen their roster. It's the same concept with what EG did after TI when they added Arteezy. In their minds, logically, they're making their roster stronger. They have a reasoning behind it that makes a lot of sense. I know there'd already been kind of some rumblings within the teams. I mean, going into the Shanghai Major, Secret was a team that was looking fairly shaky and had some, I would even say it's fair to say, had a lot of internal problems within the team. So they were already trying to think of ways to deal with them. I think Shanghai wasn't so much a fluke. It was very much proof that, hey, they've got the individual talent, they've got the players who can win big tournaments, and they've got one of the best captains in the world. But obviously the worry is you've got 6 months now. What happens if those problems that you had leading up to Shanghai return? What do you do then? Because then you're stuck with this roster. So from their perspective, it's like, hey, our roster becomes stronger, and then there's that kind of added side benefit of that some of your toughest competition then have to figure out a way to beat you without those same players, which is kind of maybe the darker side of the stuff that went down. Because I was very much from a personal level, knowing the players, the hardest part about the recent 24 hours is just knowing the players who now suddenly are teamless. It's like these guys have 3 or 4 days to find a roster, and they're going to make bad decisions. Maybe they may jump onto a roster that they don't want to be on for the next 6 months because it's the only offer they get. So that's probably the toughest part for me.
And we've seen in the past how making the wrong roster decision after a big shakeup like this can affect your career trajectory for some time. If you end up with the wrong personalities or on the wrong team, you end up playing worse, and suddenly you're not as valuable on the free agent market. Certainly. So
Black.
Talk to us a little bit, certainly Black being among those. Talk to us a little bit about the changes at EG, because obviously most of this was centered around Team Secret and EG. Talk to us a little bit, what do you think happened behind the scenes that precipitated such a dramatic shakeup?
I mean, I can really only speculate outside of, whatever limited information I have within the team. It's not really information I can publicly share. But I mean, from EG's perspective, they're not winning big championships, which is what that team was designed to do. They were getting second, maybe third place, but it wasn't enough. And I think there was, I don't know, it's pure speculation. Maybe there was some slight level of complacency. One of the things, like in Peter's blog that he mentioned after Shanghai, was that viewers shouldn't look too much into them losing on the final day. Like, he was basically saying that, hey, we played badly. Some days you just don't play your best Dota. And it was kind of came off like, I mean, this is, again, his blog, so this is not necessarily his true feelings on the matter, but it wasn't so much they didn't care they lost, but it was like, hey, it didn't come off like, man, we should have really won. We were the best team there. He didn't seem as driven or motivated, and it's maybe that kind of TI4 newbie effect where, hey, you just won a TI, are you still as motivated as you once were? And I wonder if maybe that was a concern for some EG players, looking at maybe not just Peter specifically, but the team as a whole, because they'd won a TI. Did they need to shake things up moving forward to kind of get back that spark? Obviously, you got Arteezy, who's probably one of the best players in the world never to win a Valve event in TI next to some players maybe like Burning or someone. At least in the current, like, in the past year or two, he's probably the best player not to win a major event. So he's a guy who, it's not a lack of drive. Like, he is probably one of the most motivated players out there. So I think for him, he was like, second, third place isn't good enough. We need to be winning every event, or it's not good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was sort of hard to tell in his blog, especially whether he was trying to placate his fans or if there really was some complacency there. Because, like you said, they all 5 of them, well, except for Arteezy, obviously, became millionaires overnight. You walk in, you're finishing second consistently. I mean, at what point does a combination of burnout and complacency set in? Because you are finishing second, so you feel like you're right there. But obviously, Universe and Arteezy, both players, and probably the whole roster, frankly, wanting to push that into first place. And yet the drafts got a little bit stale. The strategies got a little bit stale. It was hard to keep up with the thought process of EG as they were getting stomped with MVP, to be completely honest.
But they've got to do something different. Every single time they came to the event, they kind of came into it the same way, it felt like. And it felt like when you try something over and over and over again, have you ever heard of what the definition of insanity is? Like, it's like something's got to change. And I think that this shakeup, of course, it's a lot bigger than the shakeup I expected, but some kind of shakeup was needed, I think.
Yeah, and I even wonder how much the Dota Pit Land Finals influenced the events that happened to both Secret and EG, because I would say it's maybe actually fairly minimal to some. Yes, Secret lost in the first round to Na'Vi. Ultimately, they just won the major, though. So maybe, I think for Secret, it probably reaffirmed the fact that, hey, yeah, we won the major, but we still have these problems that can re-arise. And, hey, if we just won a major, but we're losing to Na'Vi. Like, no offense to Na'Vi, but that's a team that Secret had beaten every single time in their previous meetings, and Na'Vi have not been showing any results whatsoever. So maybe Secret, if Secret approached that tournament like, yeah, we just won the major, but we need to keep going forward, keep the puppies always talk all about momentum. Like, once you find something that works, you should get a bunch of momentum. And that was the old Secret that won like 6 LAN tournaments in a row or something, if you go back to some of their previous editions. So I think the fact they win a major and then losing the first one in the next round may have been a bit worrying for them. For EG, it's hard to say how much Dota Pit influenced it because of how quickly these events followed that. I imagine the players, I mean, they were both in Croatia together for EG and Secret, so there probably was a lot of the talks that were going down there, but it had to be something that they'd at least talked about before Dota Pit as well, I can only imagine.
Yeah, and it has to be said that even as they were finishing second in every tournament, the losses seemed to get worse. They lost in Star Ladder to Alliance, but it was a good series, and then they lost to I believe it was, gosh, who did they lose to at MDL?
MDL, it was Mars Dota League. That was, I can't remember off the top of my head, but we'll get back to it later.
Whoever they lost to in the Mars Dota League, that was a competitive series. But then the Shanghai Major wasn't quite so competitive as they lost in rather embarrassing fashion. They
lost to eHome at MDL.
That's who it was. And they looked like they were bringing it back into that series of Game 3, but they ultimately lost. I mean, they haven't even won a game in a LAN final yet, have they?
Did they win one game again? I think they lost 3-1 to eHome, I want to say. They won one game of the best of 5.
But the fact that we're searching to remember whether they even won a game in a LAN final certainly speaks volumes. Now, the next thing that obviously comes to mind is the effect that this has on North American Dota. Obviously, EG sort of floated above things in North America. They were a direct invite team. They weren't taking any qualifier spots, and frankly, they weren't competing for the same talent. With what appears to be the dissolution of Digital Chaos, what happens to North America in this whole situation?
It kind of depends on, I guess, the next big steps for EG. I mean, the kind of rumors and talk is that they're going to kind of swallow up some of the talent from DC, looking at players like Bulba and maybe AUI 2000 rejoining them once again. At least that's where a lot of the speculation goes. So I imagine, at least initially, like EG is still reported to be going to various LAN events, despite not having a confirmed roster. They're going to be going to, I think, Moscow for WePlay. So it kind of depends what happens there as far as their results go, their performance. I imagine EG as a team is still going to be that staple American team that gets invited to most events until their LAN performance drops off, because EG's just such a big name, and it's kind of become more of an expectation for these players and the team as a whole that, yeah, they just lost Artesian Universe, but I mean, you go back to like when this previous EG team was formed, during that there was that reshuffle between Team Secret, Cloud9, and EG, where there was like some kind of three-way player swaps going on. EG, that was when EG initially lost Artesian Zai, and everyone was kind of talking about, out of these teams, who got the best of it. Everyone's like, oh, Secret, they just got Artesian Zai, look amazing. Cloud9 picked up No-Tail and Misery, they look really good. EG, they got AUI 2000, he was kind of kicked off his team, and they got this kid called Sumail nobody really knew about. EG got the worst off of the trade. Turns out EG totally happy with it, win DAC, win TI. So I think the track record and proof is there that EG can make, Peter/EG as a team can make a new roster work. If it's got a couple of the same stable players, if he brings in someone like AUI 2000 again, I wouldn't look to see that team suddenly disappear from the top of NA Dota / even international Dota. So I think it's weird because EG don't really feel like an NA Dota team because they're not playing in the NA qualifiers. They don't play in NA tournaments because they're just they've always been that good. They don't need to play NA qualifiers.
That's what sucks about NA Dota in the first place, is that we don't have too many premier tournaments and whatnot. I feel like we should probably grow that. Long story short, I think that EG now being kind of in that weird flux state, it almost makes it seem like Complexity is the best NA Dota team. Like,
it's
right
I mean, there's certainly I mean, one thing that people need to think about is, as results start to pour in from LANs, there's the fact that any new roster, no matter how talented it is, takes time to congeal. We heard an interview with Puppy where he said that one version of Secret took 2 weeks to congeal, as I keep using that term.
Yeah, why?
Another iteration took like 2 or 3 months to reach its peak form, and so I think there's a lot of that to consider. Still, you've got a team that, assuming that EG was able to work out their differences with Fear and Sumail, has PPD, Fear, and Sumail on it. If you add Aoi 2000 to that lineup, who's a proven winner, he's a TI winner, and won with this lineup, and then you add, I mean, the question then becomes the offlane, which, if they are absorbing Digital Chaos, becomes Bulba. We asked Malastrix about it. What is your take on that potential lineup?
It's very good. I don't know. There's no real reason that team can't suddenly be a top 3-4 team in the world. I think the most key recipe for success, as proven over the last couple of years at all the big LAN events, Valve Majors, just TIs, has been having that just fantastic captain. And EG have one of probably the 3 best captains in the world, looking at PPD. I put him up there with kind of Puppy as well as Zhao Wei, and that to me is just one of the most key ingredients to success. Obviously, you need the talent, you need the team around that. It's not just like okay, you've got that, anything or anyone can work. But if you put that team together, it's like you say, this team they're all 4 of them are TI winners. So you've got 4 of the 5 players who just won the last TI. I think, Universe was perhaps in some ways like some people would probably call him a tournament MVP, maybe next to Peter, who was the captain drafter for EG. Those 2 were probably like the tournament MVPs for EG. So he's obviously a very hard player to replace, and Bulba hasn't had the same results on LAN especially. He's a player who sometimes is known for not performing as well in clutch situations. So it's something, though, that still can work. I mean, you put Bulba in a team like EG, and who knows how he's going to play. Maybe it's going to give him an extra level of confidence, and he plays his best Dota like he did back in his Liquid days against LGD. So I wouldn't count that. I wouldn't look at that team and be like, oh, they're going to struggle against Secret and the other top professional teams.
A lot of people make it sort of a knee-jerk reaction to that based on the fact that Bulba isn't Universe, Bulba isn't Zai. But I think if we saw anything last year, it's that if you get the right system of players working together, they can win in an international. EG and CDEC were both testament to that. Now, one thing we talked about was the need for more North American tournaments. We see the North American scene growing quite a bit with Complexity, and then, of course, oh my lord, I almost said Digital Chaos.
Relax,
that
take a breather.
Hits me right in the feels. But North American teams obviously striving to become better than their region's reputation. And you guys have started the tournament series BTS Americas. Talk to us a little bit about the motivation behind creating that tournament series.
Yeah, we've been, I guess, going back maybe 3 or 4 months, trying to bridge a kind of the gap between the semi-pro / amateur scene and the professional scene. So finding not just a way for these semi-pro teams to kind of compete and earn money, but also a way for them to get recognition, to help build their way up. For a lot of these players, it's a chance to compete against some of the known teams. We don't have like your EG playing in there, but outside of EG, we've, for the most part, seen all the top American teams, Complexity, Digital Chaos in the past, Team Archon. So teams that have all gone on to play at the majors have competed in the BTS Americas. We're now on our 4th edition, so it's a 16 team. It's just a single elimination tournament, $10,000. But the idea for us was that, hey, let's bring in a couple teams from an open qualifier. So any team who's just recently formed, or any players who've maybe been playing on like a low-key team that hasn't, like basically an amateur team, has a chance to compete. And then you get kind of thrown into the deep end and see if you can compete on a big international level. So for us, it was very much about building and trying to grow the NA scene. I think it's still hard because, kind of like we've just talked about, like a team like EG isn't really part of the NA Dota scene, so they're not necessarily there helping build it. Not to fault them, obviously they're off trying to win TI, so they're going to do like that. That's their job in the Dota scene. So for us as organized, we're like, okay, what can we do for NA? We're doing a similar tournament series in Southeast Asia as well, just trying to help create like a stable tournament infrastructure there for the teams.
Well, that's fantastic. And I mean, have you, as somebody who analyzes Dota and knows the game backwards and forwards, have you seen a major difference in play? Has the level of play in North America picked up as a result?
Yeah, I don't want to take credit ourselves, to be honest. I'm sure Valve are much more to credit for that with the major and TI system and just how much money is going into TI. And but definitely as a whole, the level of play across the tier 2 teams, or the teams who aren't called EG, has risen dramatically. And even the stability in those teams has risen dramatically. All these teams are taking a lot more seriously, and I think there's a lot of stories around that motivates and gives these teams a lot of drive. If you look at CDC at TI5, if you look recently at MVP Phoenix, there's a lot of these stories where you're like, oh, okay, these teams just kind of grew from the ground up and just kept improving, kept playing together, and suddenly they're winning LAN tournaments. They're beating EG 3-0 to LAN. They're getting second place at TI. That could be us in a year. That could be us in 2 years. So we're seeing just across America, I mean, even going into other regions as well, where this stability is being improved, as well as just generally, like you said, the level of play is just getting a lot better.
Now, a lot of the talk around the time that Sumail was picked up was about InHouse Leagues and about how he sort of rose to prominence as being a star in the InHouse League. But I think it has to be said that the problem with InHouse Leagues, while they do improve your skill, is that they don't give the teams a ton of promotion, and you don't see a lot of teams or sponsors wanting to buy into a situation where their players play behind the scenes and then lose in public. Do you think that that this sort of environment is what North America needs to develop its talent pool in the future? Because arguably this is the most stable thing that North America has right now to get new and rising talent out in a public way.
Yeah, so NEL, or what became like the Face It Pro League, was really good at its time for finding those individual talents. So you had like players like Sumail getting recognized and picked up, players like you are as well. So for what it was worth, I think it was even in some ways more valuable for those players getting found than actually being a good practice environment, because I think for a lot of players, those in-house leagues maybe weren't the best practice environments, or that's quickly what they realized. Because nowadays, The shift has very much been towards players just playing ranked matchmaking, and if anything, having really high MMR is like the new in-house league in some ways. Like being like 8K MMR is like the same as being like recognized in in-house league these days. That's where players like Miracle, are getting picked up and recognized. So I think the general trend and shift has been away from in-house leagues more towards just proving your worth through winning pub games, which at this point, playing ranked solo queue is very, very comparable to playing in those in-house leagues.
So what do you think should happen instead? Because as you said, it seems like people having high MMR is a little more beneficial than being all very good in these in-house leagues and whatnot. Like instead of having such a high MMR being the standard of what it means to get picked up and recognized by these teams, why don't we start pushing for in-house leagues a little more and maybe recognize them in a more professional light? What do you think about that?
I think for like a lot of the experienced teams looking for talent, you want to be obviously very wary and careful of just looking at raw individual talent. There's so many other issues that come with it. A lot of these players are very young. They maybe can't commit all the times they need to. They often have personality clashes. They've got egos. They're very cocky. I mean, you look at most of these young 8K players or whatever they are. They often had a track record of not being the friendliest teammates, just because that's often the two kind of come hand in hand in some ways. So. To go back to the question, it's really, I think for what ultimately becomes more valuable for these kind of top level teams when trying to scout out new talent is going to be having actual match history to go off, and not not even from an in-house level or from a pub level. Is basically join a team that I think the best example is a player like Moo from Archon, who was by far the best player on his team, but he proved it in a competitive setting at a major, at various online tournaments leading into it. So I think he's in a great position to be picked up by a top tier 1 team sometime, maybe not till after TI6, but if he keeps on shining on Archon or whatever team he plays on, after TI6, I could see him getting picked up by a big Premier team. Another good example who is on a Premier team now is Moon Meander. Moon Meander is now playing on OG, who's won a major. At TI, he completely played out of his mind on Complexity, and Complexity as a result did really well. Even if Complexity didn't finish as high as they did, I think he'd still be in a good position to be picked up by a team like OG. So I think more than changing how teams recognize players from in-houses or pubs go, it needs to be these players being motivated to find a team and prove that they can fit into a team environment, and prove they're as good as they can be in these individual settings as they can be in a team setting.
Now we're talking a little bit about how players get discovered, players being picked up by bigger rosters, discovering new talent, and obviously the fallout from the past 24 hours. Your colleague LD actually recently made a comment that the major scene has unfortunately done some work to sort of destabilize the pro scene, and I think that it's perhaps poetic that what happened in the past 24 hours followed that tweet. Your take on that? Do you think that the climate for Dota players is healthy right now, or do you think that there's something we need to do to keep a situation like this from happening, or at the very least guarantee a little bit more stability for players and teams that want to get into into Dota 2?
Yeah. For me, it kind of depends on how you define stability there. In the big picture sense, there's more money, there's more teams, there's just generally a bigger scene that's continuing to grow, get more viewers. The players, there's more tournaments going on, more prize money around. It's no longer just like the top 3 or 4 teams that are playing full-time professionally. There's now 10 teams, 15, 20 teams who are all full-time professional Dota 2 gamers. So in that sense, there's more stability in the Dota 2 scene. The problem comes in the way you look at players who suddenly find themselves without when that stability is threatened. When you think you've maybe stopped your studies, or you've quit your job or something, for example, to pursue professional gaming, and then you're seeing success for 6 months, and suddenly you're let go by your team and you've got nothing. So that to me is where there's, like before, still a lack of stability. I don't think the way the roster lock and basically the shuffles has worked has necessarily made things worse than they used to be, but in some areas it has not increased stability. If you can lose basically your sole source of income with no notice and have 3 days to find a new team where you're not going to have a sponsor even, let's say, or any guarantee of prize money and success because suddenly you're not playing with the guys you thought you were going to be playing with. Obviously, that's not a stable lifestyle in some ways. But obviously, as a whole, the scene is getting bigger and more stable. When you're having 3 majors a year, each with a $3 million prize pool, TI with a $15 to $20 million prize pool, it's obviously overall, everything's a lot bigger.
All right, on a completely related note, I'm actually really curious. What do you think about a players' association popping up after this? Because as you said, 3 days to find something else and something do you think we're going to see some movement towards the more normal sports and whatnot, where they have player associations that support the players and whatnot? Or do you think we're going to continue seeing this kind of Wild West of Dota world and esports, where the players are kind of fending for themselves and figuring out what they want to do?
I think it's going to remain as is, mostly because there was an attempted players association. If you go back to post TI 5, some of the top players were involved quite actively in that. Puppy, PPD, Swindle was another player, and everything just kind of fell apart a bit. And I think also it was also not representative of the players as a whole, because when you look at PPD as well as Puppy, you've got 2 players on the most successful teams at the time, 2 players who obviously don't have to worry about stability. So from their own personal interest, there was never any questions about, PPD now finds himself in a situation where he's lost 2 of his teammates, and there are even rumors that Sumail and Fear are leaving as well. And even if that did happen, PPD still is in a very stable position. He's won TI. He could easily form a new team. He's on EG. He's not concerned about his livelihood, but which was where partly I think that was a big reason why the players union wasn't successful. But the other big reason is they're players, they're young, they don't have experience in it, they weren't exactly organized, and they weren't really willing to commit the resources to make a players association happen. So I don't think it's going to happen now because it wouldn't have the right people involved. But what may happen is, there's been a lot of, I guess, just public outcry about players who are suddenly finding themselves teamless. So Valve obviously take note. They read Reddit. They see what people are posting on Twitter. They take a lot of feedback from the players. So if Valve don't like what's happening as far as how the roster locks are working, Valve are very known for iterating on things that they've done. So they'll improve the system. They'll go back and say, okay, this was they're very much they'll test something. If it doesn't work, they'll just change it. They'll keep on improving on it. So I don't think Valve's initial way they set up the roster look was ever intended to be a final decision, this is how it's going to be and it's not going to change. That was very much just their first idea. So now that they're seeing how it actually works in practice, I imagine it's quite likely they change how things work.
Yeah, we've talked before with previous guests about how Valve makes decisions, they just make them slower sometimes. Yeah. And when they do make decisions, they tend to think long and hard about them and then release sort of big sweeping changes at the same time. By the way, for those of you looking at the chat,
unless it's you getting fired.
Unless it's what?
Unless it's you getting fired.
Unless it's James getting fired.
Because then that was a split second.
For
Holy crap.
for what? By the way, Charlie Yang asking why we haven't published his statement on the roster swaps, and I can assure you, Charlie, that I will blog about your hilarious story about pranking Bulba as soon as I possibly can.
That's real?
That was the statement that he gave me. I asked him. I did my due diligence, and he responded in vintage Charlie Yang form. So stay classy, buddy. Godz, we're about out of time for tonight. Do you have any other thoughts on the Dota world as it exists now before we close up shop?
No, I'm really excited to see what's going to be happening at the next few big LAN events. Obviously, the next major is kind of what teams are eyeing off, but a lot of the teams are obviously eyeing off TI more so than the next major, because this is now the roster they're stuck with unless they want to play open qualifiers, which I think may end up happening. I think we may see some really top tier 1 teams suddenly playing open qualifiers because of this 6-month roster lock. So excited to see what happens over the next 6 months leading into the TI season. This is kind of the heart of this is the most exciting period of the Dota scene. The majors are great. They keep things interesting during what's kind of a pseudo off season, but now we're kind of really entering what's going to be the most exciting 6 months of the year.
Absolutely. Well, God, thank you so much for joining on the show, and I hope you have a pleasant evening or day, I
guess.
Right.
Thanks a lot, guys.